Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargav. Welcome to Tit Bits on Business and Finance with me. With the advent of e-filing, e-transacting and e-compliance in India and its ever increasing and widening scope, the entire method of governance, administration and surveillance by the government has undergone a huge change. It all started with the innocuous introduction of e-filing of income tax returns over a decade ago. At that point of time, the purpose was to avoid the harassment to the common man who stood in a queue to file his income tax return. At the inception, the ITR form was a simple one. The information that you gave was not so much. But then, as time went by, the income tax return form was made much bigger. You ended up submitting a lot of information. In fact, the information you give has now gone up even more this year. And all this information was linked to a very important link, which was the PAN number. By giving the PAN number in the income tax return, for example, you allowed the government to have access to your bank account, whether you permitted it or not. With the success of the income tax return e-filing, came e-filing of VAT returns, service tax returns, GST returns, ROC returns, and a lot of them. And all of them had one common link, which is the PAN number. And that allowed the government to cross-check the information that you file. Thus, the information in the GST return is automatically cross-checked with the information in the income tax return, which gets cross-checked with the information in the ROC return. Thus, the government is able to spot any kind of a violation or a tax evasion. Take a very basic situation. Suppose a person underreports his profits and turnover in his income tax return in order to evade taxes. But for the purpose of ROC, he files the actual figures, which is a higher sale and higher profit. He's soon going to be caught because the system automatically now compares the two databases. Thus, at the moment, by virtue of automatic system-driven comparison of databases, any person who tries to evade tax or violates the law is spotted. Take a situation of a person buying a house property with undisclosed income and he does not inform it in his IT return. You can be sure he will soon be nabbed because this information is anyway now being filed by the stamp duty authorities with the income tax department on a regular basis. Thus, this method of e-filing has been very useful in spotting any evaders, any law violators. It has also helped to avoid the harassment of the assessees by the income tax department and others by avoiding their interface with officers of the department. Even though now the harassment has actually come back in a different form, which is extremely complicated forms of filing. Many forms to be filed and difficulty in uploading these forms on the government database. Thus, as long as the database with the government from these multiple sources was being used in order to legitimately spot out, in order to nab tax evaders and offenders, it was fine. But then a huge amount of data is now in the hands of the government about every person. And then with very few enforceable controls on this kind of database and the database being available to government functionaries at the press of a button, unless the government is not very committed to prevent its misuse, it is bound to be misused. And that has to do with not adequate protection of the data of ours, which is in the custody of the government. Thus, at a very basic level, it is reported that WhatsApp messages and calls get intercepted in an unauthorized manner. At yet another level, your legitimate income tax refunds and GST refunds are withheld by the government just by tweaking the software system. At yet another level, when the government wants to keep a tap on those persons who are not politically suitable to it, it does manage to keep tap because by virtue of e-filing, by virtue of an electronic mode of living, spending, etc., the government is keeping a watch on you 24/7. Thus, if a person thinks that privacy is constitutionally guaranteed to him, that is a fact. But in reality, it gets compromised because of the huge amount of data which is in the custody of the government of India. And as I said, such data is available to the government any government functionary, with of course checks and balances which are there, which don't seem to be adequate. This data is available at the press of a button and it is getting misused. All the politically motivated actions that have taken place against persons not comfortable for the government have been because of misuse of database at the end of the day. So what started very well, which is very legitimately trying to nab tax offenders and law violators by cross-checking various databases, the line of legality has got crossed very often. And it does get crossed very often because there are not enough checks and balances to maintain the sanctity, confidentiality of such data. And this is now being confirmed in a recent report by Forrester Research. The report says that India is among those countries where surveillance by the government is at an alarming level and where the protection, privacy of data is not adequate. The fact remains is that a lot of secret data, confidential data is with the government, but the levels of protection of such data, the levels needed to ensure that the data doesn't get misused have not been enough. And then, while it is constitutionally your right to have privacy, there are not enough laws and regulations to keep a check on the government in respect of potential misuse of the data that it gets, which compromises your privacy. Thus, the laws are not adequate to keep a tab on any kind of an illegal surveillance that may be done by the government. An expert actually says that this kind of surveillance is also not being subject to too much of legislative action or judicial decisions, and the laws are not enough to keep a very strong check on the government from using such data and embarking upon illegal surveillance on the basis of such data. Thus, privacy, the right of privacy and freedom is under threat, and it will continue to be under threat because as time passes by, with the advent of technology, almost every facet of life, whether it is spending, compliance, filing of returns, booking of tickets, buying of properties, transacting in shares, credit card spending is all on an e-mode, and all that data is with the government, whose misuse at the moment is not being ruled out. This is Akhilesh Bhargav signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.